Thanks, Jay, for such a heartfelt welcome and introduction, and so touched by your story. Really felt moved by that. It's great to be here with you all. I've gotten to connect with so many people I haven't seen for a long time or have never met in person, and look forward to making new friends and connecting with you throughout the day and in the evening. I'm very excited for our talk today and kind of kicking things off. There we go. So it feels like any self-respecting event that's focused on anomalous experience has to start with near-death experiences. And Jay, you actually really kicked it off in a pretty intimate way with that regard. But I also want to start my talk with near-death experience in a more kind of composite sense, kind of describing what seems to be all too common in the field of anomalous experience. So if you imagine a 20-year-old woman having a near-death experience, and then within the next few weeks after coming through that process, she has the experience of seeing some dead people in her house, out and about, and she's wondering, what's going on? Like, why am I all of a sudden seeing people who have passed away? Basically seeing ghosts. Then a month later, she has a UFO sighting. And she's thinking, oh man, why all these weird things are happening to me now, right? Then about 6 months later, she starts having poltergeist activity in her house. And things are moving around, there's weird sounds, and she's just feeling like kind of her whole life is in some sense different than it was before the near-death experience. And she's seeing things, hearing things, and just seems to be part of a whole different world than she was before. Then about 6 months later, she has her first Bigfoot sighting, right? She's driving to work along some country roads, and holy smokes, I think I just saw Bigfoot run across the road. And she's just going, man, my life is so different now. Like, I just don't even know how to make sense of all of this. Then she starts seeing little fairy beans in the backyard. And she's just going, wow, like I am going crazy, right? And then, within a year of that near-death experience, she actually has her first experience of interacting with what she feels are some kind of extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings in her house, right? So what's going on with this paranormal party, right? Like, why are all these different weird experiences happening, right? And this kind of scenario is a lot more common than we realize. There are a lot of experiencers who have a wide range of experiences that are quite out of the ordinary, and they often start to occur after some kind of trigger event. And so as I began reading the literature a number of years ago, and kept coming across examples like this one that I just presented, I just got so interested, like, what is this? Like, why is reality such that these kinds of experiences are happening? And why do some people only have some of these experiences and others have a few more of these experiences, these different kinds and categories of experience, and yet others seem to have the full range of these experiences? And so I've come to the sense that our subtle bodies and their associated inner senses have something to do with that. So my talk today is kind of exploring some different aspects of that and how we might consider the ways in which our embodied being energetically is involved with our perceptions and experiences of anomalous phenomenon. Jeff Kripal refers to this paranormal party as the wastebasket problem, right? Because all these things just get thrown into the same bucket and no one knows what to do with it, right? You just, and it's like, is it related? Is it unrelated? And you just kind of like chuck it out because it's just the high strangeness factor is just too much. So you just end up walking away from it. Well, I want to go through the wastebasket, right? I want to pull it all out, look at it, try and understand how is it related, what's going on here. So my talk is essentially about meta theory meeting weird, right? And by meta theory, I'm referring to big models of reality that try and explain all of its dimensions. And this has been my background. For the last 20 plus years, I've been studying meta theory, integrative meta theories, and applying them to a wide range of areas: ecology, education, philosophy, and business. And so I'm always looking at how do we study a lot of different domains and then bring that to bear in order to better understand a specific area that you're interested in, right? And like, how do we integrate these different perspectives, disciplines, approaches? And so over the last 20-some years, I've been microdosing anomalous experiences. And by that I mean I'm an experiencer, but not in the typical sense. Like, I haven't had big, full-blown experiences that are just like, holy smokes. But I've had a lot of little experiences across the spectrum of weirdness that accumulatively have led me to feel like, wow, we live in a very dynamic and wild cosmos, right? And so I've gotten more interested in how might I apply my academic and professional background and integrative meta theories to this domain of anomalous experience. So a few years ago, I began creating what I refer to as EXO Studies, which I sometimes summarize as we live in a big, weird universe, what I call a wild cosmos, and it's heavily populated with intelligence and intelligent beings, right? So I define EXO Studies in a more kind of academic sense as an emerging integrative meta field committed to exploring the psychological, sociological, and scientific implications of living in a multidimensional multiverse. Now, there's a wastebasket problem. You can pretty much fit everything into that, right? It kind of covers it all. But that's the nature of my passion and my mind and my soul is I'm interested in grappling with these kind of larger scale considerations of how do we make sense of all of this. EXO Studies focuses on three main areas: multidimensional awareness, in particular our subtle bodies and our subtle senses and how those allow us to have subtle experiences. What I refer to as Galactic PostHumanism, or drawing from Jeff Kripal's recent book, Superhumanities, superhumanism. Basically an expanded sense of what it means to be human, in part in the sense that we're not alone, and an expanded sense of galactic family, right? We live in, as I said, a highly populated multidimensional multiverse with lots of different kinds of non-human and what I refer to as alternate human intelligences, right? And then lastly, there's a focus on integrative metascience, right? So how do we develop a form of science that can investigate this, not in a reductive sense, in a holistic, dynamic, integrative sense, and what would that look like? Jay mentioned in his opening remarks introducing me that a couple years ago I wrote this article, about 50 pages, called Our Wild Cosmos. This was my first attempt to bring my kind of meta theory background to bear on anomalous experience and start to write about how we might think about anomalous experience, and in particular non-human intelligences, in a larger integrative way. I'm currently working on actually 3 books that I've been working on for the last 2 years. One that's called What's Up with UFOs? The Smart Person's Guide to UFOs, ETs, and the Multiverse. This is kind of a top 10 list popular book. Then the Advanced EXO Studies book, a meta-integrative approach to extraordinary experience and anomalous realities. This really showcases 12 core concepts that I think can really transform UFO studies, and I'll be going through those in a moment. And then lastly, Our Wild Cosmos, kind of an expanded version of the article, living in a multidimensional multiverse populated with a variety of intelligent beings. And this presents a new cosmology of consciousness and contact, right? So those 12 concepts, I want to go through these briefly because this will give you a sense of what EXO Studies is trying to do, and it also set a context for zeroing in on the topic of subtle bodies and anomalous experience. So one of the core concepts is metadisciplinarity, right? So including 150 plus disciplines, fields, and domains, various topics from the academic and philosophical literature, as well as UFO and space studies, and esoteric and paranormal studies, right? So really drawing on all of that in order to help us understand how we can think about this, how we can validate and verify it, how we can better, engage our own process of contact with these realities. Then the whole concept of our wild cosmos I've mentioned. A full table refers to the fact that there are over 25 viable hypotheses as to who, what, and where these non-human intelligences or galactic human intelligences are, whether we think of them as extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, crypto-terrestrial, time travelers, ultra-terrestrial, breakaway civilization, artificial intelligence, demonic, control system, and so forth. There's 25 different kind of ideas or hypotheses or theories as to what are we dealing with here, right? And I think all of them need to be put on the table and considered. So a full table is this notion of let's just put it all on the table and then really just see kind of what emerges as we continue to engage and study and explore the phenomenon. Then taking things serious and holding them lightly. Jay also mentioned this as kind of a mantra of mine as we approach all of this. And this includes the practice of ontological generosity, right? Leading with a generous sense of what's real, right? Opposed to a skeptical sense, right? It doesn't mean we don't bring in the skeptical element and critical thinking, but we start from a place of ontological generosity, because I think the world is much more wild than we often give it credit for. And then epistemological reflexivity, so just reflecting on your own biases, worldviews, values, tendencies, and then methodological pluralism, using a lot of different methods to explore and understand this phenomenon, right? So all of that contributes to our ability to take all of this very seriously, but also to hold it very lightly. Doubleness is another concept I've been developing, and part inspired out of the work of Jeffrey Kripal. He talks about this in his own way in a number of his books. But essentially, it's the fact that the phenomenon is inherently multivalent and self-erasing, in part because it transcends our established categories of consensus reality and thus often displays two or more seemingly contradictory qualities at the same time. So it's both subject and object, it's self and other, it's past and future, it's real and unreal, there's trauma and transcendence, there's experiential elements and empirical elements, inside, outside, symbolic and scientific, and so forth, right? Like there's just this dynamic doubleness that just seems to show up with the phenomenon over and over again. And then there's this notion of wild being. Wild being is the recognition that reality is multiple, it's withdrawn, meaning it doesn't always reveal itself fully to us. There's always aspects of it that are outside the horizon of our cognition or knowing. It's fluid, it's participatory, so we're in a deep dialogue with being and reality in these contexts. It's ontologically weird, meaning it's not just weird because we're seeing something we don't understand. It's just weird at a basic foundational level of its ontological realness. Like it's just inherently weird, right? And then it's indeterminate and it's enacted, meaning again, kind of this participatory aspect between us and the phenomenon. We bring something to the party and the phenomenon brings something to the party. And it's mysterious. So mutual enactment, I just mentioned that, this idea that, there's this co-creative process that occurs between ourselves and the phenomenon. And so we bring layers of distortion and interpretation, but that doesn't mean there still isn't something meaningful we can say about the phenomenon. We just have to do a little more work and effort to kind of discern the elements that we're bringing to it that are not helpful and the elements that are. Leaving Magonia. Right? Jay mentioned that one takeaway from his work with me is appreciating, the work that Jacques Vallée has brought to the UFO community in the late 60s around the interesting correlations between the fairy lore of medieval Europe and even contemporaneously with UFO reports and experiences and entity encounters. Well, I'm deeply indebted to Jacques Vallée for giving us a passport to get to Magonia. But I feel like he didn't give us the ticket to get out of Magonia, and so we've kind of been stuck there, right? And so there tends to be this way in which the fairy beings in our reality get reduced to the alien beings, or the alien beings get reduced to the fairy beings, and it's like, or they're both just a cultural frame for something else. My experience, both in terms of my direct experience and the research I've done, is that there are beings that are distinctly fairy in nature or elemental or nature spirits, and there are beings that are distinctly extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional. And so we need a more integrative comparative analysis that makes room for all of these complexities, including the fact that there's galactic fairies and Earth aliens, right?